Greetings ladies and gents, welcome back to the Craft Hammer. I'm your host Stefan, and in today's video we're continuing on our short tutorial videos to help you, the new beginner, get to grips with some of the basics. And in today's video specifically, we're going to be looking at gluing a model together and putting them on our base. So some quick advice that I can give you: the thicker the consistency of the glue is, it will be more difficult to handle, it will be slightly slower when it comes to drying, and it might obscure some details. So do be careful. If you are doing some high details that are very small, I would recommend going for a much thinner glue than something like a thick gloopy type of super glue. Thicker glues have their place normally when it comes to either making terrain or very big models where you need a lot of glue in that connection point. But for us, since we're all doing a basic Space Marine here, we're in fact going to be using something more thinner. Now on one end you can of course use super glue. This isn't too bad. As I mentioned though, it can obscure some of the details and you might start gluing things together that shouldn't be. So do be careful if you're going to use super glue for actually gluing a model. In this scenario we're going to be using something called Tamiya extra thin cement, which is a very thin type of glue. It's not quite as similar as a super glue. It is more for plastic where it melts the two sides and bonds them together. That's how it does its connection, while the glue works in a different manner. Now in this case, since we are using these easy push fit models, we don't really need that much. They do come with some tiny little holes where we'll just put a nice little drop of the Tamiya cement. It will go in there, we'll put in the little pieces, and that should really do most of it. But of course there will be tiny gaps here and there. So what you do in those tiny little gaps, you push the two pieces more closer together, hold them firm with your fingers, and then use a tiny bit of Tamiya cement at the edges of the gaps. Keep it there for about 30 seconds and it should melt those gaps much closer together. So as a quick demonstration, we open up our little jar. We don't really need too much, so even the amount that is there, just a tiny little drop inside. Get the little piece, pop it in. Not much pressure is really required in this scenario. That really should be enough. The plastic in there will melt and our head should be perfectly fine there. Now you do have to be careful when you're using something like Tamiya cement. If it goes outside of the seams where you're putting it, it can also start to make a little texture on the plastic itself as it is melting. So do be careful, but it's not as bad as it seems. If you make a tiny mistake, you can then in fact use the brush itself, and let's say you missed a tiny bit of a seam when you're scraping, you can always use the brush itself to get rid of that seam and you have a nice smooth texture. So if by accident while you were gluing two pieces together and a tiny bit goes on a pauldron and it makes a bit of a texture, you can then reuse the glue and smoothen out the texture on the pauldron. So let me get this quickly glued up and then we'll show you what we're going to do for the base. So here is the finished model all glued up nicely. We did leave the backpack off, and the main reason why I leave most backpacks off is because when it comes to the painting process, which will be another video in the future, it is much easier with the backpacks off to get certain details on the back, hence why we left it off. Now for some of you more experienced users of the Tamiya cement, not only can you smoothen out things that might be on circular pauldrons, but when it comes to capes themselves, sometimes you do have little seams on the capes which kind of detracts from the reality of that cape when it has a massive gap on it. One of the things that you can do with Tamiya cement, you can stroke on that seam with Tamiya cement, which will help move some of the plastic over and start covering the cracks. So definitely recommend that you practice with Tamiya cement. It is a great connector for plastic, so definitely recommend that. Now when we're looking at bases, for this model specifically, you do get, as most models, a standard black base. We will be looking at this textured one, mostly just because it is what I use on my force, but it is not that much different in reality to this one. You could of course glue them down with super glue. If you do go down that route, what I would recommend is that you get your scalpel and cut in some tiny lines on the bottom of the connection points, in this case the shoes, where you will be connecting onto the base itself. And of course I'd also do some tiny lines where you're actually going to put it on the base. The main reason is you want some of the super glue to go inside the lines on the actual legs and inside the lines on the base itself, and that will help connect that bond much stronger than if you were to just put 2 little drops and put it on top. In this scenario, we're going to do the Tamiya cement. We're going to put drops on the bottom, and then we're going to push it down and hold it on the base for about 30 seconds. You could probably go for 20 seconds, it's not that bad. And what that will do is the pressure that we're going to apply on top, not too much of course, we don't want the cement to shoot out on the sides. The action that it will do, it will melt the bottoms of these legs to this space. So I'm going to get that doing right now. When it comes to bases, we do want to be a tiny bit more generous when it comes to the actual glue. I like to shake it about just to get a tiny bit more on the brush. Now unfortunately, I'm currently running out on this actual jar, so soon enough I suspect that I will need to go and get another one. After about 20 seconds here, after applying pressure, if I still feel like it needs a tiny bit more, I will just get the brush and put it around the sides of the legs so that at least those parts get melted onto the base itself. So that is the basics of gluing. Keep it thin, don't add too much. Once you get a bit more experience, of course you can use the cement to a higher degree and use it as a functionality for other things. Super glue has its place. We will be showing you other things when it comes to basing and where exactly super glue falls in there. So make sure to stay tuned for that and subscribe. I think our next video will actually be about basing. So until next time, take care folks.